Thank you so much for being with us, Ambassador Lipstadt. My name is Daniel Solomon. I'm the president of AJC's Campus Global Board, and joined with us.
Hi, my name is Yossi Murciano, and I'm the president of the French Union of Jewish Students, UEJF. Our organization has been at the forefront of the fight against anti-Semitism in racism and all form of discrimination on French campuses since 80 years. We work every day to defend memory, promote justice, defend Israel existence, and ensure that Jewish students can live and express their identity without fear. And I want to say hello to Emily. Emily is the president of UEJF in the local chapter of Sciences Po, and I think we can applaud her very much.
Okay, so let's get started. Similar to American diplomacy, countering anti-Semitism and U.S. support for Israel have long been recognized in the U.S. as issues of national conviction, like democracy, liberalism, and bipartisanship, to name a few. So I was wondering, from your perspective as both a diplomat and a historian, how has this changed in recent years?
Well, I think, and we've heard this from Professor Nadel and from others this morning, this is not entirely new. There's a continuity, and was mentioned the exhibit on Dreyfus, now at the Jewish Museum here. I won't even try to say it in French. But it's different. There is a difference. And there's a difference in the sense of intensity. There's a difference in the sense of what is possible. But there's another difference. And I was privileged about just 2 years ago to be at the White House podium when the national strategy, the first American national strategy on fighting anti-Semitism was introduced. I was one of the presenters of the strategy. And from the podium of the White House, I made the point, in fact, we were not in the White House itself, but in the executive office building, that wedding cake building next to the White House, that we were standing but a couple of hundred yards, and I checked this out with the State Department historian to make sure I had it correct, where the State Department used to have its offices in that building in the 1930s. And in the 1930s, the State Department of the United States of America was determined, to borrow a phrase from David Wyman's book, to erect paper walls to keep Jews out of the United States. One of the most famous, not the only tragic case, was, of course, Otto Frank, who tried to get into the United States. His sponsor was the Strauss family, the owners of a small department store called Macy's, and he couldn't get in. They tried to keep Jews out, and they succeeded in keeping Jews out, so that the quota from Germany the immigration quota was not filled till 1938 after Kristallnacht. And here the difference was the United States government was issuing a national strategy to fight anti-Semitism. Are there still problems in government? Absolutely. That's one example. The other example is my position itself, which was passed by the Congress of the United States, first establishing the special envoy position at the level of an ambassador. Other than a secretary of a federal agency, a member of the cabinet, that's the highest level that you can be in the United States government. Those are two comments, and there have been others as well, of the difference. So that, yes, the problem remains, but whereas in the 1930s, there was no government fighting it, either they were neutral, and how you in the face of evil can be neutral is another conversation, or they were supporting it. Today, governments recognize, whether their efforts are strong or are paltry, that this is a problem.
Louis Vassi just talked about it. In 2024, a Jewish activist from UEJF was excluded from a room because she's a Zionist. Everyone in this room knows that excluding a student from a lecture hall simply because she called herself a Zionist is an anti-Semitism act. And yet, this basic truth is often questioned and in public debate, during many weeks just after the events in Sciences Po, UEJF needed to fight in the media, in universities, and with some French MPs too, to practically convince them, very progressive people, that we cannot exclude a Jew because she's a Jew. So my question is, why has it become so difficult to clearly name anti-Semitism today, according to your experiences? And what are the tools we need to use to express it without being dismissed or discredited?
I think, and this has been mentioned before, when I was before the Congress of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, because I had to be confirmed by the Senate, a delayed process, I talked about a spectrum of anti-Semitism from the right to the left. I no longer use that spectrum. I talk about a horseshoe where the two extremes meet. And what's fascinating, the extreme right and the extreme left, you would think, okay, so they both are going to be dedicated to hating Jews, but they'll hate them for different reasons, because extreme right. But it's the same tropes. It's the same stereotypes, finance, power, etc. So you see that meeting there, which is one of the great problems that we face. And the problem is that what used to, a horseshoe, just the two ends are supposedly magnetized, but the magnetic strength is going up to more of the center. I think there's another point, and I've made this point. This was something that I stressed while in office, and my team stressed it as well, that we have to recognize that the threat of anti-Semitism, and I do believe that we have to be, sadly, it's sad that we have to do it, but we have to convince the rest of the world that the threat of anti-Semitism is not solely against Jews and Jewish institutions. And I don't use the word just, because in English, when you say just, someone says to you, oh, that's a nice jacket. Oh, it's just an old thing, Or that's a nice bag. Oh, it's just an old Birkin bag. I'm getting my new one, kind of thing. It means less. I don't mean less. But there's a multi-tiered threat of anti-Semitism. Forgive me, but I think this deserves to be explicated. First, of course, is the foundational threat to Jews, Jewish institutions, and those associated with them. We had the terrible tragedy, which has been mentioned here, properly so, and that we meet in Capitol Hill Museum, or Capitol Museums, I'm sorry, on May 21st. It happened to be two people came out who worked for the Israeli embassy. It could have been two non-Jews. It could have been two Germans. It could have been two French. So against Jews, Jewish institutions, and those associated with them. And if it were only that, it would be something worthwhile for a government to address, because as Ambassador Rome pointed out earlier, when one group is threatened, it threatens the whole society. But it's more than that. We've heard the idea and expressed, and again, properly so, of anti-Semitism as a threat to democracy. We often talk about many disruptions in society, homelessness, food insecurity as threat to democracy. But here there's a direct link. If you buy into the conspiracy theory, which is the foundation stone of anti-Semitism, that's one of the things that makes anti-Semitism, different from other prejudices. It's a conspiracy theory. If you buy into that conspiracy theory and believe the Jews control the government, the judiciary, the media, the banking system, you have given up on democracy. But now there's a flip side, which became so clear to us, and we heard it in the previous panel on universities, when, I'll give you an example from an American campus, UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles. The encampment students, or if they were students, no one knows, because they masked themselves and refused to identify themselves, so who the hell knows who they were. But when they blocked entrance to the university library, and they said, are you Jewish? No. You can go in, welcome, go learn. If the student said, yes, I'm Jewish, are you a Zionist? Do you support Israel? If you said yes, you were not allowed in. Those students looked this way and that for someone to stand up for them. UCLA has a police force, as Chancellor Martin pointed out, many universities do, including my own. They were nowhere to be seen. Nowhere to be seen. And when those students brought a case against UCLA fought it, and they said, "Oh, we didn't stop them. It was others." That those students gave up on their faith in the rule of law. It's not just democracy and the rule of law. In the rule of law as applied to them. Oh, it applies to everyone but us. That's the second level. The third level is it's a threat to national security and stability. There's different forms of anti-Semitism. There's ideological. When we hear it from Iran, it's ideological, it's religious, it's we hate Jews and we would like to see fewer of them walking the face of the earth, to put it bluntly. But there's also what I call utilitarian anti-Semitism. After October 7th, we saw a surge in anti-Semitism from the PRC, the People's Republic of China. Why this surge in anti-Semitism? The Chinese are not inherently anti-Semitic. We've seen it before. It wasn't suddenly new on October 7th. We've heard about continuity, and I think that's important. We've seen it but suddenly there was a much greater thing. And it was the American intelligence community, I see, interpreted as saying a message from the PRC to the global south, what used to be called third world countries, other countries, that we're with you, we're not, the United States may be with them, i.e. Israel, but we're with you. They used it as an ideological tool. Another example, and Professor Nadel explores this in her forthcoming book, at the end of 1959, there was an outbreak of what today would be benign, relatively benign anti-Semitism in the Federal Republic of Germany, West Germany, New York, in London, and a number of other Western capitals. Who was behind that? The KGB and the Stasi, and then with complicity of communist elements in these Western capitals. It was the USSR's way of signaling, oh, you say we're anti-Semitic, look what's happening to you, or you have faith in West Germany? People said the Nazis. They didn't say the neo-Nazis. It was too soon after the war. The Nazis are back. They use the anti-Semitism as my Eastern European half of my ancestry would say, as a kochlöffel, as a cooking spoon, to stir up the pot. So that's utilitarian anti-Semitism. So you have anti-Semitism as a threat to Jews, to democracy and rule of law, to national security and stability. And then when I was here in November for the dialogue and for the Paris Peace Forum, I was in conversation with Manuel Valls, your former premier, who made the iconic statement, Jews who were alive during and who were aware during Charlie Hebdo and Hyper Cacher, remember, France without Jews will not be France. And I spoke with him about it. And I said, I looked at the speech in which you said that. And in that speech, he had reassured French Jewry, you'll be secure. Don't leave us, because so many were thinking of leaving. But then he went on to say that. And I interpret that, and I asked if my interpretation was correct, and he agreed with me, that it wasn't just saying to the Jews, stay here, we'll take care of you, but it was saying to French society, if you take a group that is part of the warp and the woof, the fabric of this society, and you render it so that they don't feel safe staying there, something is going to change in your society as a whole. So when I spoke, so these are the four tiers, and this is a message we must give to the rest of the world. This is not just about our security. Yes, of course, we want our children to be safe. We want to be safe if we wear Magen David or a kippah, or some ostensible Jewish, something that identifies us as a Jew. But this is a threat to society at large. My final comment on this is, and I said this in fact to our intelligence community in the United States when I was asked to meet with the various agencies, think of anti-Semitism as, we often say, the canary in the coal mine. That canary is dead. It's finished. Fertig, gamarnu, dead, mort, it's gone. Much better. And that canary was brought down there because it was dispensable. So, and think of it instead as the flashing amber yellow light before the light turns red. It's warning you. And I always think of it, as it's about to go red, it goes faster. I don't think it does, but my imagination is, because I speed up, get through it. But that the red light is coming. That red light may not be more anti-Semitism. That red light is a disruption to society. And that's the message we have to give. This is not just about the personal safety and security of a segment of the population, which deserves to be safe and secure, but as a threat to society at large.
So I've been thinking a lot recently about free speech. AJC.
It's a pesky little thing.
It is. AJC, in partnership with the American Association of Universities and the American Council on Education, and a broad coalition of academic organizations in the United States, came out with a significant statement expressing concern for recent government action on anti-Semitism and against, well, under the guise of anti-Semitism, against universities, and pledged to work together to counter anti-Semitism. In the past 2 weeks, the perpetrators of two violent and deadly attacks yelled the phrase "Free Palestine" in carrying out these vicious attacks, the same phrase that has been continuously defended under the guise of free speech. I'd love to hear your perspective on this.
You know, Free Palestine may have started out as a political statement, as a political that you want a two-state or one-state solution, though, with equal rights. So how well is that working out in Belgium? I don't know. But it has become, and if it wasn't clear before, it certainly was clear on the night of May 21st, and you've seen the videos. Or in Boulder, last week in Boulder, Colorado, and so many other places. Language evolves. Even more disturbing, of course, is from the river to the sea. And many of the people who chant it don't know which river, which sea. Some do, but some don't. But what that essentially means is get rid of all the Jews living in the state of Israel. Or the worst of all, of course, is globalize the Intifada. Globalize the Intifada means kill Jews everywhere and anywhere you can find them. Those kind of statements may be allowed by free speech, and I think Chancellor Martin was speaking to this quite specifically earlier. Those statements, while they may be allowed, should be unacceptable. And as was said earlier during the academic panel by both panelists, they should be in the sense that even if they're allowed, they should be forbidden by your moral and ethical principles. And this is how low we've sunk in that it's okay. And again, a rule of law is good, but it's not sufficient. So while I believe in free speech, I also believe there are certain things that are unacceptable. Professor Nadel gave us an example of using the N-word, and quoted by Martin, written by and used by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Nobel Prize winner, but there's certain phrases that become unacceptable, and the idea that we have to say globalize the Intifada is an unacceptable idea is mind-boggling.
About this kind of slogan have become like commonplace in our universities, but I feel that those who use them believes they are on the right side of the story, the right side of the world, the good guys, and fighting for the people who are oppressed and everything. So how do you analyze this from so-called virtuous antisemitism by Eva Illouz, describe it, and where being an anti-Zionist is a good thing in many places, especially in activist places.
It's a very disturbing and worrisome phenomenon. We see it on the campus. It's not going to go away so fast. You and I, Roberta and I, were talking about it earlier. It's not one generation. It's going to be multiple generations. I think of the student on some campus, whichever one it might be, the engineering student, who wants to just get to his class or her class. Not all engineering students are male, wants to get to her class to figure out how to build the next kind of building or whatever it might be. and the encampment is harassing them, and they resent it. But they walk away with the notion, I'm sorry, what is this protest here, and why are they stopping me? But they nonetheless walk away with the impression, whether explicit or implicit, whether conscious or unconscious, that Israel is wrong, and the supporters of Israel are wrong in committing this terrible act. And that's not going to go away with law. It needs law, it needs education, it needs a change in cultural norms, and that's going to be very, very long in coming. It's quite worrisome.
So we often hear that the Holocaust is no longer the only memory, that Jews are not the only victims, or that the Palestinians are suffering the same thing today that during the Holocaust. So you are an Holocaust denial specialist, if I may.
Think how crazy it is that there should be a specialist in Holocaust denial. It's nuts.
So would you consider that this kind of relativization of is a new form of Holocaust denial?
Yes. Yeah, there are two kinds of Holocaust denial I talk about. Hardcore Holocaust denial, which is what I faced in court against David Irving, where he said, of course, the gas chambers didn't happen. There weren't 6 million Jews who were not died, murdered, etc. That's hardcore. Softcore denial is equivalent. We have the description of whack-a-mole. You hit the ball here and it pops up over there. Softcore denial it's squishier, to use a highfalutin term, in the sense that, what are they talking about the Holocaust again? Or why do I have to hear about the Holocaust? Or there's so many people who suffered. Or was it really so bad? Or that kind of thing. So you're not denying the facts, but you're annoyed with this focus on them, and you're annoyed with the fact that Jews were once victims and they have the audacity to talk about it. But I also think that sometimes we often cite it too often. Not that when think about the Holocaust, 1 out of every 3 Jews on the face of the earth was murdered. 2 out of every 3 Jews in the continent of Europe and off, Rhodes and Libya, etc., murdered. If you go on most places, France is one exception, but even in France, you go in Europe and you visit synagogues or former synagogues that are now museums to a destroyed people, or memorials, or sometimes they're movie theaters or supermarkets, depending where you're going. Europe used to have a thriving Jewish life. And there are very few countries, France being one of the exceptions, that still have that. So its impact is immeasurable, and it still holds. And even in terms of population replacement, I think we've just barely met the population replacement of 80 years ago. But it's annoying to people. It's annoying. And look, are Palestinians in Gaza, the residents of Gaza, suffering horrendously? Of course. And should our hearts be breaking? You see children who are hungry. You see people fighting for food. It's horrific. It's horrific. You can hold two truths in your mind at the same time. Is it a genocide? No, it's not a genocide. There is a legal definition of what a genocide is, and this is not one of them. But it can be terrible without being a genocide, and it can be terrible, and someone who used this term earlier, I don't know who to credit it with, but what we saw on October 7th was a pogrom in Israel. And the world just sort of went right by. For a few days, I was in Rome when it happened, and I think on Tuesday, it happened on Saturday, on Shabbat, Chag. But on Tuesday, there was a march, fittingly, or a rally under the Arch of Titus against what happened. So it was quite striking. So the arch lit up. I said, I just want the menorah back. But that, of course, changed very, very dramatically, and the world is annoyed. And you can fight against this genocide, this accusation of genocide, and it's still at the same time have sympathy in your heart for the people who are suffering.
Last question. Many young people in this room likely enjoy learning, but are even more motivated by action. And so I'd like to ask, in your view, how do you feel are some productive and pragmatic ways that young people can actively counter anti-Semitism both now and as they advance in their careers?
A number of things. Under my leadership at the State Department, my team, the Office of Special Envoy, we spearheaded a drive, and France is a signatory to this, of global guidelines to counter anti-Semitism. If you don't know about them, just Google it or use whatever platform you use, search engine you use, on global guidelines to counter anti-Semitism. And they're written for governments, to governments, but they are absolutely applicable to civil society. Leaders should speak out expeditiously and unequivocally when you encounter anti-Semitism. Speak out expeditiously and unequivocally when you encounter anti-Semitism. I had a student come to me and she talked about encountering anti-Semitism from her suite mates in the dormitory, and I said, speak out. That doesn't mean you have to bash them over the head, but educate. And she said, well, I'm afraid I'll lose their friendship. I said, I'm not sure you want them as friends. But it's easy for me to say. They were her roommates, her suite mates. But speak out expeditiously and unequivocally. Educate yourselves before you start worrying about others. Educate yourself about what is anti-Semitism and what is not anti-Semitism. There's a Talmudic principle, tafasta merubeh lo tafasta. If you try to grab too much, you end up grabbing nothing at all. Something may be said that you find despicable, you find disturbing, and you disagree with. It may not be anti-Semitism. Not all criticism of the policies of the State of Israel are anti-Semitism. If that were the case, the hundreds of thousands of people who demonstrate on the street on Saturday night in Israel would be anti-Semites, and of course that's ridiculous. If you know anything about Israel, you know that the national sport of Israel is not football, it's criticism of the government, and it depends which government is in, you always know better about what, and even if it's a government you support, you still know better about what should be done. So criticism of policies of the state of Israel, that's not criticism of the existence of the state of Israel. That is anti-Semitism. And if you say, well, it's a anachronism to have a state based on a theology, well, tell that to the, I think, 22 Muslim countries that exist in the world, So educate yourself on what is and what isn't anti-Semitism. There are lots of good books out there and others forthcoming that you should know. So, and then try to educate others. I think that those are the important things. And let me say to the Jewish young people who are here, there's something else to all of us, but live as Jews. We spend, it's one thing to know about what is done to Jews, but it's another thing to know what Jews do. Educate others about Jewish life. You have a Friday night dinner, invite someone who's never been there before. But you yourselves, even that's an outreach kind of thing, but also inreach. I spoke about a horseshoe, but there is a spectrum of Jewish life. And on one end of the spectrum is joy, and the other end is oi, And we spend too many Jews are very sensitive to and aware of the oi end. But there's much more joy. And Jewish life was never, people didn't live as Jews to spite anti-Semites. They lived as Jews because it was who they were. It was because they appreciated the wisdom of that tradition. And it was their being. It was as essential to them as being a woman or a man or whatever. But that was their essential being. So to live Jewish lives, I'm going to show the anti-Semites, but because of what it gives you. So I would say speak out, educate yourselves and educate others, and most of all, live at the joy end of the spectrum, even while you fight the oi end. There was something in Israeli history called Aliyah Bet, the illegal immigration. You all know about the ship Exodus, or maybe I'm, if you read the book or saw the movie, yeah, and that's right, it sailed from France exactly. But there was another ship, and the remains of that ship used to be when there was just one road up to Haifa, the sea coastal road. It was called the Af al Pi Chen, the nonetheless, and it comes from the song many Jews sing at Havdalah at the end of Shabbat about Eliyahu Hanavi. They sing it because when Eliyahu is going to be the harbinger of the days of the Messiah, and then all days will be like one continuous Shabbat. And it says, "Ve'af al pi sheyitmamea," even though Eliyahu has taken a long time to get here, even though he tarries, nonetheless, I believe. And I think we have to live in an afal pichein world, in a nonetheless world. Don't let the anti-Semites determine who you are and what you are.
And on that note, thank you very much to Ambassador Lipstadt. Thank you all for being here.